Okay. This is going to be a review of the 27 constitutional amendments. We're first going to cover the Bill of Rights and then cover several of the other amendments from 11 through 27. And so, of course, the Bill of Rights, in a large part, was a promise made to many of the states to be added to the Constitution in order for it to be ratified. The original version of the Bill of Rights was written and proposed by James Madison in 1789. He had originally had 17. The House of Representatives approved those 17. The Senate then approved 12. And the states, as each would ratify that list, approved 10. And the final list of 10 became official in 1791. And so we begin with the First Amendment. There are 5 basic freedoms protected within the First Amendment: the freedom of religion, speech, assembly, petition, and press. And of course, within the First Amendment, we have certain limitations. For example, your freedoms may not infringe on someone else's freedoms. So, for example, the freedom of speech you have if you slander or damage someone else's reputation or cause them harm. That has crossed that line. And so, again, your freedoms are protected as long as they don't infringe on someone else's freedoms. Moving on to the Second and Third Amendment. The Second and Third Amendments are direct results of the Revolutionary War and the conflict between Great Britain, both before and during that the war for independence. The Second Amendment provides for a freedom to bear arms, or of course, that was originally intended for us to maintain a militia in defense of our country and our state. The Third Amendment protects us from quartering troops in our home. And again, this is a direct result of the Quartering Act, which was imposed by the British prior to the Revolutionary War. The Fourth through the Ninth Amendment all protect individual freedoms from Americans at the federal level. And so the main purpose of the Fourth Amendment is to protect us from illegal searches and seizures. And of course, probable cause is a major part of that. The Fifth Amendment protects us from being held accountable for crimes committed twice or double jeopardy. It also protects us from having to testify on our own behalf. In other words, this is the right to remain silent. That is part of the Miranda rights. You've also probably heard at some point someone say, "I plead the Fifth." This comes directly from that. The Fifth Amendment also states that we must be indicted for a crime before we can be held for that crime. Moving on to the Sixth Amendment, this carries many freedoms for those who have been accused of a crime and are thus awaiting a trial. And so it guarantees us the right to a speedy trial, an impartial jury, and the right to confront witnesses as well as to have a lawyer present. The Seventh Amendment guarantees a jury trial in a federal civil court. The Eighth Amendment guarantees that we are free from cruel and unusual punishment and that fines will not be extraordinarily large. And of course, this is all dependent on the crime itself. And finally, the Ninth Amendment guarantees that we have rights that are not expressly mentioned within the Constitution. In other words, the Ninth Amendment helps make the Constitution and the Bill of Rights relevant to 2021, not just 1791. Moving on to the 10th Amendment. The 10th Amendment is unique in the Bill of Rights in that it does not address individual freedoms, but it states that states will have any power not granted to the federal government. Again, thus guaranteeing that the states will have certain rights which aren't expressly given to the federal government. Moving into Amendments 11 through 27. So we're going to group these together because many of these have similar topics and deal with similar issues. For example, the 12th 20th, and 22nd Amendment all deal with the office of the president. The 12th Amendment redefined how the vice president and president would be elected through the Electoral College. And in other words, instead of the second place finisher being the vice president, now presidents can choose a running mate. The 20th Amendment set a new start date of January 20th for the terms of new Congress and the president and vice president after an election. And the 22nd Amendment defined the term limits for the president. Of course, a president can serve or can be elected for 2 4-year terms. They do not have to be consecutive. It also establishes the maximum term of 10 years. So, for example, if a vice president were to take over and serve less than 2 years in place of his sitting president, he could still then run and be elected for 2 more full terms himself as president. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment are collectively known as the Civil War Amendments. The 13th abolished slavery. The 14th granted citizenship and guarantee equal protection, specifically for freed African Americans after the 13th Amendment. More on that in a moment. And the 15th Amendment granted the right to vote to African American men, again, after the Civil War and then after the 13th Amendment. Going back to the 14th Amendment, the 14th Amendment in many ways nationalized the Bill of Rights. Many states had found ways around the Bill of Rights because the Bill of Rights were written at a federal level, and thus many states were finding ways to break the guarantees and protections there. And so the 14th Amendment guarantees, in essence, that the Bill of Rights will grant or the protections in the Bill of Rights will be guaranteed to all at the state level and local level as well. The 17th and 23rd also have voting implications. The 17th Amendment granted the people the right to choose and vote for senators instead of state legislatures, which they originally were. And the 23rd Amendment granted the District of Columbia the right to vote in presidential elections, giving them 3 electors in each presidential election. The 18th and 21st also have a common link. The 18th Amendment abolished the sale and manufacture of alcohol in the United States, thus entering the United States into the era known as Prohibition. And then the 21st Amendment abolished the 18th. So not only are they tied together by that, but the 21st Amendment is the only amendment to abolish another amendment or rescind another amendment. And finally, the 15th, 19th, and 26th Amendment all grant voting rights to individual groups. The 15th, of course, we just found out, granted freed African American men the right to vote. The 19th Amendment granted women the right to vote. And the 26th Amendment guarantees that anyone at least 18 or over may vote in federal elections.